On the morning of February 3rd, 2020, at Texas A&M University, commerce student contacted the university's maintenance department to report a strange hole in her dorm wall. What began as a standard facilities issue turned into the exposure of a double homicide inside a supposedly secure college residence hall. When university staff responded to call, they entered the neighboring dorm room and discovered a grim scene. Two young women, sisters Deja Matz, 19, and Abene Matz, 20, were found dead from gunshot wounds. Lying nearby was a 2-year-old child, alive but suffering from a gunshot injury. The suspect, Jacques Smith, had a violent history and was the ex-boyfriend of one of the victims. Just days before the murders, a protective order had been filed against him. But despite that legal barrier, he managed to enter a locked university dormitory, bypassing multiple layers of security without any signs of forced entry. Authorities quickly launched an investigation, uncovering surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and disturbing flaws in the campus's access control systems. Smith was arrested within 24 hours, but major questions remain. How did he get in? Why weren't access credentials immediately revoked after protective order? And how did a known repeat offender reach his victims without raising alarms?
Police spent hours searching the Rowlett home where 21-year-old Jacques Smith was arrested, a day after police say he gunned down 20-year-old Abene Matz and her sister, 19-year-old Deja Matz, inside Deja's dorm room at Texas A&M Commerce. She was studying public health.
University Police Department of Virginia.
Today, police released a 911 call from a student who found a bullet hole in her dorm room wall.
It looks like it came with the ceiling. Parts of the ceiling had fallen.
Family members say Abene took her 2-year-old son with her when she drove her sister back to school Sunday. It was late, so she stayed the night. How Smith gained entry to the dorm room Monday morning is a question the Matz family wants answered.
This case doesn't just expose a failure in personal protection. It reveals deeper vulnerabilities in how college campuses handle threats, enforce legal orders, and manage security systems. When safety protocols break down from the inside, even locked doors aren't enough. What really happened inside that dorm room? And how many other campuses are quietly at risk? This story uncovers every overlooked detail. Stay with us as we unravel this shocking story and uncover the heartbreaking details of what led to this senseless loss. If you enjoy real crime stories that uncover the truth, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us share real cases, spread awareness, and give a voice to those who can't speak for themselves. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's begin. At Texas A&M University, Commerce, 19-year-old Deja Matz had just begun her journey into adulthood. A freshman student with academic aspirations, she was described by classmates as quiet, dedicated, and focused on her studies. Deja had no known conflicts, no threats against her, and no involvement in criminal activity. She kept a low profile and maintained good standing with the university. According to university records and peer testimony, Deja was not the intended target in a violent act that would soon claim her life. Her only connection to the perpetrator was her relationship to her older sister, Abene. Abene Matz, 20, was not enrolled at the university. She was temporarily staying in Deja's dorm room, an arrangement not uncommon among family members during difficult personal times. She had recently left an abusive relationship with 21-year-old Jacques Smith. That relationship had produced a child, a 2-year-old boy, who was also present at the crime scene. Abene was known to law enforcement through a series of domestic violence reports involving Smith. Though she had made efforts to leave the relationship, the risk remained. She was actively trying to rebuild her life while seeking safety with her sister. The youngest person involved in the tragedy was the 2-year-old son of Abene Matz and Jacques Smith. He was inside the Pride Rock Residence Hall dorm room at the time of the murders. According to police reports, the child was shot and critically injured during the attack, but survived. Responders found him alive, suffering from gunshot wounds, and rushed him to the nearest medical facility for emergency care. He was stabilized and later placed into protective custody. His survival added urgency to the case and raised new concerns about the escalating danger of domestic violence involving children. The fact that the child was present during the incident provided key investigative value. Not only did it confirm the proximity of Smith to his former partner, it also underscored a violation of a protective order that had explicitly barred him from coming near either Abinay or the child. The survivor's presence also added weight to the legal charges later brought against Smith, including multiple counts of aggravated assault. Jacques Smith and Abinay Matz shared a volatile history. The couple had been in an on-and-off relationship that included multiple incidents of domestic violence. Police records show that Smith had previously been arrested for assaulting Abinay, with at least one reported case resulting in criminal charges. Despite her efforts to separate from him, Smith continued to pursue contact with her. This pattern escalated in the months leading up to the murders. According to court records, a protective order was issued against Jacques Smith in late January 2020, just days before the fatal shooting. The order was filed following a violent incident and included specific language preventing Smith from making contact with Abinay or their child. It also barred him from entering her residence or coming within a certain distance. The order was active and legally enforceable at the time of the attack. Law enforcement confirmed that Smith had violated the terms of this protective order by entering the dormitory and confronting Abinay and Deja Matz. His actions indicated a clear disregard for the legal restrictions placed upon him and raised questions about the effectiveness of protective measures in cases involving known repeat offenders. The case of Jacques Smith followed a known trajectory common in fatal domestic violence cases. Repeated abuse, ignored warnings, legal protections without enforcement, and eventual fatal escalation. Despite prior arrests, Smith had not served significant jail time for previous assaults. Police had responded to multiple calls involving him, yet these encounters failed to stop his behavior. Reports from Abinay's family suggest she had made repeated efforts to alert authorities about the threat he posed. This sequence of events placed all individuals in the dormitory at risk. The fact that Smith was able to enter a supposedly secure campus facility, despite an active protective order and no student credentials, revealed serious flaws in enforcement and security protocols. The protective order issued to Abinay Matz was intended to act as a barrier between her and Jacques Smith. However, the legal mechanism alone lacked physical enforcement. There was no system in place at Texas A&M Commerce to automatically alert campus security or restrict access to individuals subject to such orders. Smith reportedly used a mailbox key or other previously issued access method to enter the residence hall. There were no signs of forced entry. No alerts were triggered. No staff intercepted him. This gap in security allowed a known violent individual to move freely into a building filled with students. It demonstrated how, in practical terms, a piece of paper labeled protective order was not enough to stop a determined aggressor. It also reflected the need for integrated systems between law enforcement, judicial institutions, and private or public property management, especially in high-risk cases. Should college campuses be required to integrate protective order databases into their access control systems? Are protective orders effective if not tied to real-time location and access restrictions? Should individuals with documented histories of domestic violence have automatic restrictions from visiting campus facilities? What additional security measures should be enforced in student housing to prevent similar cases? In the final days of January 2020, Jacques Smith was arrested for domestic assault after a violent altercation with his former partner, Abinay Matz. Despite his history of aggression and prior arrests, Smith was released soon after his arrest. The incident marked yet another escalation in a documented pattern of abuse. In response, Abinay filed for a protective order, which was granted in the days immediately following Smith's release. The order legally barred him from making contact with her or coming near her residence. Abinay, 20, was not a student at Texas A&M Commerce, but she had been staying with her younger sister, Deja Matz, 19, who lived in Pride Rock Residence Hall, a dormitory on the university campus. Concerned for her safety and that of her 2-year-old child, Abinay chose to stay with Deja temporarily, while the legal system processed protective order. However, one critical vulnerability went unaddressed. Jacques Smith still had possession of a physical mailbox key that belonged to Abinay. Whether issued to her during a prior visit or not returned after prior stay, the key remained active and unmonitored. That key, seemingly insignificant, was Smith's covert way into a secure building. The university's access control systems did not flag or restrict his entry because it was not a broken door or forced entry. It was a quiet exploitation of a working key. There were no alerts triggered when Smith entered the dormitory. There were no access logs alerting campus security. The doors opened without resistance. The cameras recorded him, but no one was watching live. Deja and Abinay were inside the dorm room, unaware that Smith was in the building. They had no warning and no chance to prepare. On February 3rd, 2020, Smith made his way to Pride Rock Residence Hall. There was no broken window, no crowbar, no force. Using the mailbox key, he gained access to the dormitory without triggering any security protocols. Once inside, he moved directly to the room where Deja and Abinay were staying with Abanay's 2-year-old child. Inside the dorm room, Smith opened fire. The details gathered from ballistic reports and forensic analysis later confirmed the violent efficiency of his actions. Deja Matz was shot. Abinay Matz was shot. The child was shot, but managed to survive the attack. There was no noise heard from outside the room that would indicate a struggle or call for help. Students in nearby rooms went about their day unaware that a double homicide had just taken place a few feet away. Smith fled the scene without detection. He exited the building the same way he entered, quietly, with no resistance. The only clue that something had gone wrong came from a student living in the adjacent room. The student reported a mysterious hole in the wall, which prompted a routine maintenance response. When maintenance staff arrived to inspect the complaint, they entered the neighboring dorm room. What they discovered turned a maintenance call into a murder investigation. Inside the dorm room, they found the lifeless bodies of Deja and Abinay Matz. The child, though wounded, was still alive. Emergency services were contacted immediately. The toddler was transported to a local hospital in critical condition. In response to the double homicide, the university initiated a campus-wide lockdown. Students were ordered to shelter in place as law enforcement secured the area. Texas A&M Commerce Police Department took the lead in the initial investigation, with assistance from local and regional law enforcement agencies. The crime scene was secured. Investigators began processing the area, mapping bullet trajectories, identifying entry and exit points, and searching for any physical evidence that could indicate how the suspect gained access. One detail became immediately clear. There was no forced entry. Doors were intact. Locks were functional. Nothing had been broken. This detail shifted the investigation's focus toward access permissions and keys. Police and campus security began reviewing internal security footage, key issuance records, and access logs. As they gathered information, they developed a working theory that the attacker had exploited some form of access that bypassed the main entry protocol. At the same time, the victims were identified and next of kin were notified. As law enforcement worked behind the scenes, the university community began to react to reality that 2 women had been murdered in what was believed to be a secure residence hall. Surveillance cameras installed in the Pride Rock Residence Hall recorded Jacques Smith's movements on February 3rd. The footage showed him entering the building without any signs of a struggle or manipulation of the doors. His behavior did not raise any immediate red flags to staff, likely because there was no forced entry or aggressive movement. He walked in like someone who belonged there. Further investigation of access methods revealed that the mailbox key he used was not deactivated. This allowed him to enter parts of the building that should have been off-limits. The system in place at the university at the time did not link key activity to protective orders or campus safety alerts. Therefore, no digital alert or notification was generated when Smith entered the premises. Crime scene investigators found multiple shell casings inside the dorm room. Ballistic analysis confirmed the weapon used and tied it to the suspect. Bullet paths helped investigators understand the positions of the victims at the time of the shooting. Blood patterns and spatter evidence further confirmed that the victims had little or no time to react. The child's injuries were consistent with a close-range gunshot wound. Despite the severity, The child survived, an outcome that added urgency to the investigation and later became a key component in the charges filed against Smith.
Police spent hours searching the Rowlett home where 21-year-old Jacques Smith was arrested, a day after police say he gunned down 20-year-old Ebony Matz and her sister, 19-year-old Deja Matz, inside Deja's dorm room at Texas A&M Commerce. She was studying public health.
University Police Department of Skin.
Today, police released a 911 call from a student who found a bullet hole in her dorm room wall.
It looks like it came with the ceiling. Parts of the ceiling had fallen.
Family members say Ebony took her 2-year-old son with her when she drove her sister back to school Sunday. It was late, so she stayed the night. How Smith gained entry to the dorm room Monday morning is a question the Matz family wants answered. Last week, courts ordered Smith to stay away from Ebony. A restraining order was issued after Smith was arrested in Garland, accused of assaulting her with a frying pan and a lamp, and police say he pulled a knife. He was arrested, but records show he bonded out 2 days later. University police say surveillance video and witness tips led to Smith's arrest. Hours before, he wrote to Abney directly in a Facebook post saying, quote, "We were supposed to grow old together, and I can't even look at our pictures without crying."
Should campus access systems immediately revoke entry for anyone listed in a protective order? Should physical keys be replaced with revocable electronic access systems in college dorms? How can universities better monitor known threats who are not students but have connections to student residents? Was this tragedy preventable? And if so, where did the system fail the most? Within hours of discovering the bodies of 19-year-old Deja Matz and 20-year-old Ebony Matz inside the Pride Rock residence hall, investigators named Jacques Smith as the primary suspect. Smith was the ex-boyfriend of Ebony and the father of the 2-year-old child who survived the shooting with injuries. Initial witness statements, security camera footage, and forensic evidence all pointed directly to Smith. Detectives worked with both the Texas A&M Commerce Police Department and the Hunt County Sheriff's Office to issue a regional BOLO, be on the lookout alert. His known address, phone records, and previous vehicle information were used to triangulate his last known location. By that same night, a multi-agency search effort, including local law enforcement and federal support, had located Smith in Rowlett, Texas, approximately 50 miles from the campus. He was arrested without incident. At the time of his arrest, Smith was unarmed but reportedly cooperative. He was formally charged with capital murder, which in Texas could result in life without parole or the death penalty, and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon for the shooting of the toddler. Smith was booked into the Hunt County Jail and held without bond pending court appearances. Jacques Smith had a long-standing history with law enforcement. Public records confirm multiple prior arrests, most involving violent behavior. His rap sheet included family violence charges, including a documented physical altercation with Ebony Matz prior to her death. Previous assault arrests, including one incident involving bodily injury to a past partner. Weapons possession violations, despite restrictions due to his criminal background. At least one protective order violation before the fatal incident. Smith had been arrested just 10 days earlier for allegedly assaulting Ebony, which led to the protective order issued against him. Despite this, he was released back into the community with no tracking, restrictions, or monitoring beyond the court-issued document. Multiple police departments had prior knowledge of Smith and categorized him as a high-risk offender. However, none of these alerts were shared directly with Texas A&M Commerce or the university's housing administrators. As a result, campus authorities had no warning about Smith's potential threat level. Ebony Matz had obtained a protective order against Smith just days before the murders. The order included specific language barring him from contacting or being within a certain distance of her. However, the order's effectiveness stopped at enforcement. The document did not include any technological or institutional enforcement mechanisms. It was not linked to the university security system, housing database, or key access registry. This meant that, despite a legal barrier, Smith still had unrestricted physical access to Ebony's location, especially since he possessed a mailbox key from his previous visits. No law required Smith's access credentials to be revoked upon issuance of the order. There was also no coordination between the family court that issued the order and the university's housing department. Because of this disconnect, dorm authorities were unaware that a violent offender with legal restrictions was able to move freely within a building full of students. The protective order existed on paper, but it failed to provide any real barrier. Law enforcement could only act after the order was violated, and in this case, it was already too late. The murders occurred inside Pride Rock Residence Hall, a dormitory marketed as a secure and controlled access housing facility. However, several lapses allowed Jock Smith to enter undetected and unchallenged. Mailbox key as access tool. Smith likely used a mailbox key assigned to Abene Matz to bypass the main entrance. While mailboxes were located inside the dorm, these keys inadvertently allowed broader access to common areas due to outdated hardware design. There was no digital verification, no access log tied to the key, and no alert raised during entry. Access control system not properly updated. When Abene ended her relationship with Smith, there was no mechanism in place to remove his access to the dorm. Her request for a protective order was not linked to an automatic review of housing security or guest access. This gap allowed Smith to continue using outdated credentials with no digital fingerprint or oversight. No manual check-ins or swipe logs required. The residence hall did not require students or guests to swipe IDs upon entry. Unlike hotels or high-security campuses, there was no front desk security, lobby check-in, or guest approval process. This allowed Smith to walk in without leaving a trace. Room entry without forced entry. Investigators determined that the dorm room door could be opened from the inside if previously unlocked or improperly latched. Whether Smith was let in voluntarily, had access to a spare key, or waited until the door was ajar remains unclear. However, the key fact is that no force was required to enter, meaning no alarms were triggered and no damage was reported. These weaknesses enabled Smith to carry out the attack without alerting security personnel or campus police. The university's reliance on passive, outdated systems left the dorm vulnerable to anyone with insider knowledge. This case forces critical questions. Should protective orders automatically trigger revocation of campus access privileges? Should campus mail keys be redesigned to restrict broader access? Are current security systems reactive rather than preventive? Until institutions close these loopholes, similar tragedies remain possible, even in places advertised as safe. The double murder of sisters Deja and Abene Matz inside Pride Rock Residence Hall at Texas A&M University, Commerce on February 3, 2020, shocked the campus and quickly spread across national headlines. 2 young women were found shot to death inside what was supposed to be a secure dormitory. A 2-year-old child, a Bainey's son, was wounded but survived. In response, Texas A&M Commerce released a public statement acknowledging the tragedy. The university confirmed that 2 women were deceased and that law enforcement was actively investigating. They emphasized their cooperation with authorities and expressed their intent to support impacted students and staff. The university also announced a temporary campus-wide lockdown immediately after the incident, which was lifted later that day. Classes were suspended for multiple days as the investigation unfolded. Mental health counselors were made available, and campus police increased visibility around dormitories. The campus community organized a vigil to remember Deja and Abene Matz. Students, faculty, and community members gathered outside the dormitory to hold a candlelight ceremony. The vigil was peaceful, with speakers calling for safety reforms and greater accountability. Outside the university, public attention quickly shifted to the issue of dorm security. Social media erupted with questions about how the killer, Jock Smith, gained entry without forced entry, despite being under protective order. Parents of other students began demanding answers from the administration. Local and national news outlets questioned the reliability of access control systems in college residence halls, especially those that house young women and children. Concerns over how the university handled building access, visitor monitoring, and security alerts were now at the forefront of discussion. For many, the tragedy raised alarm about whether college campuses were truly prepared for domestic violence threats coming from outside the student population. Jock Smith was arrested in Rowlett, Texas, hours after the murders. Law enforcement had identified him as a prime suspect almost immediately due to his relationship with Abene Matz, his recent arrest for domestic violence, and a protective order filed against him just days prior to the murders. Smith was charged with capital murder, a charge that carries a possibility of life without parole in the state of Texas. He was also charged with aggravated assault due to the injuries sustained by the 2-year-old child. According to legal filings, prosecutors intended to pursue the case as a double homicide with additional child endangerment elements. Smith pleaded not guilty. During initial hearings, the court reviewed evidence collected from the crime scene and digital surveillance. Court documents revealed that surveillance footage showed Smith entering the dormitory without force. No doors or locks were damaged. Instead, investigators discovered that he likely used a mailbox key that still provided access to the building. Further evidence presented included forensic findings, shell casings, bullet trajectories, and blood spatter confirmed close-range gunfire. Digital footprint, text messages and call logs showed Smith had made repeated contact attempts despite the protective order. Witness statements. Other dorm residents reported hearing noises and a child crying, but did not initially recognize it as gunfire. Smith's criminal history became central to public debate. He had been arrested previously for family violence and weapon possession, and was considered a repeat offender. This led to broader concerns about how protective orders are enforced and whether they are effective at preventing escalation in domestic violence cases. As of the first several months after his arrest, no official trial date had been set. Pre-trial motions focused on the admissibility of surveillance footage and previous arrest records. The murders exposed critical systemic vulnerabilities that extended beyond one campus. The case demonstrated how college campuses may lack real-time protective infrastructure for students facing intimate partner violence. Failure to enforce protective orders on campus. Despite a protective order issued just days earlier, Smith was able to enter the building and gain access to Abene and Deja. Protective orders often rely on voluntary compliance unless they are tied to active monitoring systems or physical restrictions. In this case, the university was not alerted to the existence of protective order, and no steps were taken to block Smith's building access. Underestimating insider threats. Campus security protocols were designed to block outside intruders, but they failed to account for non-student insiders with prior access, such as former partners. Smith reportedly retained access to the building through a previously issued mailbox key. This oversight allowed him to walk into the residence hall undetected. Lack of centralized offender tracking. There was no system in place to flag individuals named in protective orders and restrict their access to student facilities. Protective orders issued by city or county authorities were not integrated with the university's security database or student housing systems. Communication gaps between agencies. The case highlighted poor coordination between local law enforcement, campus police, and university administration. The protective order was filed and valid, but it was not communicated or enforced at the campus level. There was no mechanism to notify Texas A&M Commerce security staff that a potentially violent individual had legal restrictions involving one of their residents. In the months following the murders, Texas A&M Commerce began reevaluating its campus security structure. ID entry protocols implemented. The university implemented mandatory ID swipes at all residence halls. This meant that students and authorized individuals could no longer rely on previously issued physical keys or general access cards. Every entry would be logged and monitored digitally. Mailbox access restrictions. A separate security policy was introduced to decouple mailbox keys from building access. Keys issued for mail purposes would no longer allow entry to the building, especially after a student or guest had their access revoked or moved out. External security review. The university commissioned an external security audit. Independent consultants were brought in to evaluate dorm access systems, emergency response plans, and visitor verification protocols. Legislative push. Following the publicity surrounding this case, local lawmakers proposed legislation that would link protective orders to automated access revocation systems on campuses. The goal was to create an integrated database that flags individuals under court order restrictions and immediately terminates any physical or digital access they might have to student housing, academic buildings, or communal facilities. These reforms were part of a growing call for colleges and universities to take more proactive measures in protecting students from threats linked to intimate partner violence and non-student individuals. Despite the legal actions and campus reforms, several unanswered questions remain. Why wasn't his access revoked after a protective order was issued? There was no system in place to notify campus security of the order. This created a critical gap in enforcement. Could earlier arrests have led to longer detention? Smith had multiple arrests, yet he was released shortly before the murders. This raises questions about pretrial release decisions in domestic violence cases. Why wasn't there a real-time alert system for potential threats? There were no tools in place to alert dormitory staff or residents that a known threat had re-entered the premises. How many other campuses face similar hidden vulnerabilities? The issues revealed at Texas A&M commerce likely exists in various forms on other campuses nationwide. Many rely on outdated or non-integrated access systems. To the audience, we ask, should colleges immediately revoke all access for individuals named in protective orders? Even non-students? Are campus residence halls truly safe, or do they just appear to be secure? What measures should be mandatory when a student reports domestic violence? How should schools handle non-student visitors in dormitories? Could AI-based surveillance, real-time flagging systems, or access monitoring have saved Deja and Abani's lives? This case was not just a failure of one individual. It was a breakdown of multiple systems designed to protect. If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.